Dr. Allison Casola is a senior research investigator and the assistant director of research in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In this role, Dr. Casola oversees all trainee and faculty development related to research and scholarship. Dr. Casola's independent research portfolio surrounds sexual and reproductive health, specifically the psychosocial correlates associated with women's health and wellness in primary care, as well as communication norms and attitudes towards menstrual health and wellness. Dr. Casola earned a PhD in epidemiology from Temple University, a Master's of Public Health degree from Westchester University, and a Master Certified Health Education Specialist. With that, Dr. Casola, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am really excited to be here today to talk more about writing. I love talking about this, so hopefully it kind of comes through. Feel free at any time if you want to ask a question. You don't have to wait until the end. I know we're kind of a small group today. If you put something in the chat and I don't see it, just feel free to kind of interrupt me. That's totally fine. Sometimes with the share screen, you don't see it as quickly as you should. So welcome. Great. So for today, I really want this presentation, I really want this talk to spark reflection and consideration about your own writing patterns and your tendencies and the ways that you can feel more confident and productive when it comes to your own research and scholarship. So our formal objectives here, we are going to be able to describe different types of manuscripts and publishable works. We're going to reflect on personal areas of growth surrounding writing and publishing and explore ways to improve personal writing productivity. So more specifically, I'm going to run through four kind of buckets that I like to call out when we talk about writing. So the first are the types of papers. So we're going to discuss various types of papers and manuscripts that we can write in academic medicine, or even non-academic, usually academic affiliate, but community work. All the different types of things we can write. We're going to think about the phases of writing and really break those down. You probably haven't thought about those in a while, or you might have skipped a few. So we're gonna dive into that. We're also going to touch on barriers that hinder our writing progress and ways that we can kind of prioritize writing a bit more, which is always easier said than done. And then to wrap up, I kind of call this my other considerations. It's kind of my catch-all bucket for a lot of other things that I want to talk about when it comes to writing that you might not know or you might not have been told unless somebody has kind of sat you down and told you, related to authorship, journal selection, and paper management, project management. So lots of different papers we can write. Some you might be familiar with, some you might not be. So first we have the traditional research paper. So this is kind of your bread and butter research paper called the IMRAD structure. So it stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. So this is the general format of it. This is kind of any paper you've read, really general research paper. And this is the way it's set up. It should feel like an hourglass. Okay, I love this graphic. You'll notice I'm big on graphics and flowcharts, things that can help jog your memory. And this is one that I use when I teach my trainees, when I teach my residents, and when I do a lot of consulting with my own faculty. So we start broad in a paper. We want to set the tone. We want to define, operationalize those variables, talk about the general statistics, the prevalence of what's going on. And we want to then identify our gaps in the literature. What is unknown that we are going to fill? And how is our research question going to do that? And you can kind of see them. We're at that transition point where the methods kind of flow into the results. So we're broad and we're narrowing it down to exactly what we're going to do. And then we widen it back out by doing what we say we're going to do. And then we're going to connect it back to prior literature. We're going to talk about the medical implications, the community implications, the policy implications, all of it. We're going to talk about that generalizability. So we start broad, we narrow it, and then we widen it back out. This is also same kind of format, traditional practice, if you're writing a research brief. So a traditional research paper might be closer to 3,000 words. A research brief might be another type of traditional research paper, but on a smaller scale. It might be a pilot project or another type of approach that way that will allow you to kind of, usually it's a shorter word count, maybe 1,000 to 1,500 words, sometimes to get some of your early papers out or early project stuff out that will then set the tone for future work. I do a lot of brief reports. Sometimes journals prefer a brief report if you only have a singular sample, or you have a small sample size, or it's one institution or one program, research brief doesn't mean it's any less valuable. It's usually just maybe on the smaller scale, or it's just a shorter paper. So don't look down on that or worry too much about that. If it's like, well, I only publish briefs, that's okay. But another big thing I always like to touch on is that outside of that traditional research paper, and this is a lot, so this is more of a slide for you to have for your own reference, but outside of a traditional research paper and a traditional brief, there are a number of other papers we can write. And if you don't necessarily see yourself as what you think of as a quote unquote traditional researcher, where you're writing papers based on interventions and clinical trials and things like that, that doesn't mean you don't have scholarly insight to share with the science world. So, and this might really fall into place if you're an educator or if you do a lot of training work too. So you have that original research report, you have the brief report. There's also a variety of review papers we can write. In addition to letters to the editor, perspective pieces, narrative essays, and even case reports. I personally have been writing a lot of perspective and theoretical narratives because I find that that is what gets read, or that's how I feel like I can best convey my science to others. And hopefully this might spark a little bit for you. Maybe it's a new programmatic piece, a new curricular piece, anything. So a little more specifically when it comes to perspectives, commentaries, and narratives. So these are all great paper options for you to consider. There's so many ways to be reflective from a theoretical investigation. Maybe you're applying a theory or a model or framework to another area of practice or to another way to train residents, or you know what I mean? There's so many things you can think about. It might be a call to action. Maybe we need to get the attention of a lot of people on defining what is a situation that's happening or a disparity that's occurring, and bring attention and bring light to something. Maybe it's a lessons learned paper after implementing a new workshop or a new didactic for trainees, and you want to kind of show the brief eval, get some general feedback, and share why this might be important. So this table here, this is from Walling and Shapiro's 2013 paper that really kind of shows some other themes and ways to approach these papers. Is there a story to tell? Is it a personal experience? Maybe you had a very moving clinic rotation or a very moving interaction with a patient, and that's kind of led you to where you are, or makes you want to think differently in terms of your care or the community action connection piece. Or is there something you want to inform the field of? Maybe this is like a thinking locally, thinking community-based. Maybe there's something that's happening that we need to bring attention to in your region of New Mexico, or you have a colleague that's trying to blend it together between, and we know primary care is so broad, it's cradle to grave, so it could be anything really. Is there a way that you want to maybe challenge current perceptions about something, or bring attention to the forefront of something we don't talk a lot about that we should? So, and I like to give the example, Amanda mentioned my past work and my current work, really my portfolio on menstrual health and wellness, and talking about period poverty and bringing attention to the stigma surrounding menstrual equity. I've been writing a lot of perspectives pieces and call to action papers, and really just trying to get the vocabulary out there so that we can work to break the stigma. And we can't really start fixing issues if we don't talk about it first. So a lot of my work is focused on communication stigma and norms, and how that might permeate from community engagement through our healthcare system as well. So again, doesn't mean any of these are less than papers. Some of this commentary, narrative, perspective work is some of my most prized science, I would say. So like I framed one of those papers and gave it to a colleague that worked on it with me because it was so meaningful, and I felt like it was something that could actually make a difference. We do a lot of work, we do a lot of science, we do a lot of research and engagement and quality improvement, but sometimes it feels like there's a disconnect between what we do and action at times. So this is a great way to do that. It's also a great way if maybe you're waiting for data or you're waiting for kind of your study to kind of finish up, or a project to kind of get to the post survey thing. This could be a great way to talk about a framework or a conceptual model, behavioral health engagement piece that can connect to care or connect broadly to your portfolio. And I personally just think they're kind of fun. It's a little bit more narrative, a little less rigid in a sense. And then also a case report. You guys know what case reports are, but I always love sharing this as a paper from Family Med. It's over 20 years old, but it's a great quick read, and it has a template, like a worksheet on how to outline a case report. So I always like to share this so that people have it kind of in their back pocket, particularly residency faculty that might be working one-on-one or in small teams with a couple residents, and they might be seeing unique cases or unique situations. And this is a way that you can also help your trainees to start writing, or helping you kind of together outline what's going on. So hopefully now it's kind of simmering that you're thinking about a couple of the different types of papers you can write, or what you've already written and maybe how you would want to do it better or improve on it. It's always easy to like Monday morning quarterback a situation. So we're going to talk about the phases of writing. And you might be like, I literally haven't thought about this since high school, middle school, maybe. And I too was one of those people until I got to my master's degree and I needed to get an assistantship to pay my tuition. And I took a job working as a writing tutor in the writing center. And I was like kind of surprised that they picked me, kind of honestly, let's be real. But it was very enlightening for me. I was the only STEM major, the only STEM program. Everybody else was an English or a communications program where they do a lot more writing than me. And I really learned so much about the process of writing and how it can be applicable regardless of your content area or your area of expertise or your field. So I'm really excited to talk about that. So first and foremost is outlining. And biggest thing with outlining, if you fail to plan, you're gonna plan to fail. This is, I personally think, the most critical part of the writing process. This is going to be a map of your paper. This is your time to make that plan of action, your roadmap. What is the general theme? What are you trying to show? What are you trying to document or support? This is a way for you to start organizing your ideas, and provides you the space to really just think about all these potential pathways or potential pieces that you might want to investigate. During this time, it's great to use subheadings liberally. Use them all over, put placeholders in, ask yourself questions. It doesn't have to be pretty, but it's really great to have a nice outline when you're starting. This is a screen grab of an outline that I've set up, and I've shared it with my team, my colleagues, my faculty as well. I use outlines all the time. I can't start a paper. I also find that when I use a template for an outline, it makes it a little more fun to start writing because I'm not truly starting from a blank document, because a lot of times that is our biggest battle, is ourselves. But this is great too, because then you can kind of put in placeholder sentences or sentence stems, I like to call them, on things that you know you need to add. You know that in that background section, that introduction section, it's going to be about 3 to 4 paragraphs. It's pretty standard. The opening is going to have that hook. We got to get the reader in. We got to operationalize our constructs. We got to define the topics. And I also call this sometimes the epi paragraph. We need to talk about the scope, the statistics, why this is necessary for us to think about. So this is always great. I always like doing this. I usually have this I saved and I give it to my students. My students help me start outlining a lot of times, but I also know that I have a template that they can start to follow. This is another kind of connection to the IMRAD structure, but also a great tentative outline. I like it because it asks you questions. So the introduction is what is known. We're going to talk about this in approximately 3 paragraphs. We're going to talk about the gap in knowledge, what is unknown. And our hypothesis, our aim, our research question is going to directly, we should be able to kind of puzzle piece it directly into the gap in knowledge. This is happening, therefore we're going to do blank. And we're going to be the ones that talk about the fix or the how to address it or the next steps. Results, what did you get? And then the discussion, how do the results bridge that gap? So we're kind of looping it back up. How are we connecting it back together? And then the conclusion is really kind of like, why should we care? What do we need to do moving forward? What's our take-home message going to be? So you can, I definitely recommend an outline. I also want you to really, like I said, spark your own connections and reflections and thoughts. And maybe this is giving you ideas on how to create your own outlines or your own standard approach to what you do. During grad school, I did a lot of work in how we teach things too. So I have a teaching certificate, and it was a lot on figuring out and giving people the knowledge that they need, particularly adult learners, and helping them to find a way that they can organize it in their brain, in their mind, in their own day-to-day so that they can retrieve it. So hopefully these are kind of sparking ways for you to think about your own knowledge acquisition and retrieval process so that you can continue doing science, which is what we all love to do. So our next phase is drafting, and this is where we are going to just simply be expanding our outline. We are going to take those bullet points that we used, and we're going to start adding detail. We're going to start making some connections. We're going to start letting our ideas evolve a bit more. You might not have full paragraphs. You might have like one paragraph and then the rest are still like sentences in bullet point form. That's okay. Let it evolve. Let your ideas kind of simmer and let them come together. This is really important to make sure that you are not letting yourself get bogged down with what are called lower order concerns. That's grammar, spelling, sentence like syntax, that kind of stuff. Just get it out on paper. You have this outline. Now just start making those connections again. Dump it all out there. Think about the themes, but don't get hyper focused on being perfect. Don't overthink it. Just get it down on the paper. Next phase we have is revising. So now you have this kind of crazy draft going, right? You have this outline that's been expanded. So now we can start thinking about those higher order concerns. We can start to sharpen and clarify your aims, making sure that the aim is clear and it is fitting that gap in knowledge or that thematic approach that you're taking. This is where you can kind of realize, hey, I need to kind of expand it a little bit more, or I need to further develop out this construct that I'm making, or this piece I'm trying to fit here. This is a time to think about your connections between ideas. So you can think broad, think paragraph level revisions. Maybe this is going to be a lot of rearranging of things. Maybe you're going to be like, oh, this paragraph doesn't really fit here. It needs to kind of come down a bit, or I need to split this into two and move it. We're kind of doing some big flow movements here. And then the best tip I can give you here, and it will feel so uncomfortable, is to read your draft out loud to yourself. And that is a writing center thing. Shout out to Westchester University in Southeastern Pennsylvania. But anytime somebody would come into the writing center, they were required to read their paper out loud to the writing consultant, the writing tutor. And people were like, I can't do this. This is no way. But you hear the flow. You can hear it to yourself. And reading it word for word, not kind of skipping it, not reading it in your head, because sometimes you might go a little fast because you've read it a million times, but taking the time and reading it out loud to yourself and say, okay, this paragraph is good, but I'm missing something. And it's a really great practice to get into. I still do it to this day. It's very weird the first couple times you do it, but you get used to it just like anything else. And also, you're not reading it in front of a group. You're reading it to yourself in your office or in your living room or in like on the couch kind of thing. Nothing crazy. And then lastly, we have editing. So editing is our lower order concerns. This is just fixing errors, grammar, spell check, nitpicking little words, like adding a very specific transition phrase or stylistic problems, seeing if you're kind of repeating the same phrase and you kind of need to use a different couple words, things like that. You're really kind of doing the nitty gritty here. So, and this is just a general editing checklist. I have all these links at the end, but this is from George Mason University, their writing center. And it is thinking about like, do you have the right thesis? Do you have the appropriate topic sentences? Do you have page numbers? Do you have titles? Are you using different types of verb tenses? Things like that, where you're not really focusing on the ideas anymore. You're polishing it here. So we went through all those phases, but here are, again, some other random tips that I like to give out to my trainees and my faculty. A big thing when you're writing, and as you're starting to think about something, you generally have an idea. You're like, okay, this is going to be a narrative paper. This is going to be a perspective paper. Or this is a brief report. So you probably already have a couple ideas of journals you might want to be submitting to. So making sure that you're consistently checking back and forth to adhere to the journal guidelines and checklists. So you don't get too far down and realize, oh my God, I have to cut 3,000 words from this. So find that balance of not getting bogged down with that at the beginning, getting your ideas out, but making sure when you're in that drafting and revising phase, because this is not a linear process. This can be very cyclic, that you're kind of putting an asterisk of like, okay, now it's time for us to put in our journal requirements and doing the subheadings that they require, things like that. Huge thing for me is working to simplify your text using active voice. So I am not embarrassed to say that when I was writing my dissertation, my advisor constantly wrote active voice all over my papers. And grammar was not my strong suit. And I didn't remember what it was. I was like, I know what it is, but I can't explain it. I went to YouTube and I pulled up a video reminding myself. If my mother knew, she would probably be really embarrassed, but we're not telling her. But I reviewed just YouTube videos on how to convert passive voice into active voice. It also will just help in terms of science writing. It helps you to be much more direct. And it helps you to cut down on words too. If you can start to see and you make a bigger impact, you pack more punch with your statements and your claims and your texts together. So if you need to do a quick review on that, go for it. It is definitely the biggest issue I see. I review a lot of papers. I review a lot of abstracts. It's definitely a big thing when it comes down to like when you go to submit your papers, when you submit your abstracts on how can this be improved a bit more. And I find that active voice comes with deliberate intent to use active voice at times, but we also now live in a world where you can kind of change your spell check grammar settings to look for active voice or look for passive voice and fix it. But kind of making that a part of your routine approach when it comes to science writing and writing in medicine you'll feel the difference, definitely. And then not getting too bogged down with word count. I have a lot of my trainees specifically that get very nervous when they're like, oh my gosh, well, we only have 2,000 words. And I was like, I don't care, write it in and we cut. It's easier to cut than it is to add. And a lot of times you might just be adding, you're writing and you have a lot of words. You might find out, hey, this is actually going to be 2 papers, or this is going to be a part 1, part 2, or I need to save this for the next thing I'm doing. So it can't hurt. Great. So you know about the types of papers we can write. You know about the writing process itself. And now here is kind of the real battle. It's how do we make writing a priority? Not just today, not just this week, not in the next 2 weeks, because you're kind of gung-ho about it, but consistently. How do we embed this into our daily routines? Which again is a lot easier said than done because we all have really insane schedules and clinic loads and patient loads and obligations and family and personal life. But writing is a skill, just like everything else in the world, in your career. You went through medical school, you went through residency. Did you become a doctor overnight? No, you had to develop those skills. You had to get the confidence, and it took a lot of hard work. Writing is the same thing. I notice this particularly when I'm working with my residents that they are like, I haven't written anything since like my personal statement for my applications. And that's very different writing. Some of them haven't written a report or a paper since undergrad. And that might have even been like early in undergrad. Once, if you're a bio major, I was a bio and chem major. So like we had specialized stuff. So again, it's something you just probably haven't done. And it's a different part of your brain that you're kind of tapping into. And it's a different process. It's not going to be as much of a checklist as I'm going to get through these emails. I'm going to get through this in my inbox, and then I'm going to do this presentation. It's not going to be as check as we go. So there are a lot of distractions that come with our job. Some might be more pressing than others. We have emails. We know that emails are like the bane of our existence. And we get into this mindset of, does everything feel so urgent or burning that we have to answer it right away? We have meetings, and double-edged sword, a lot of meetings could be emails. A lot of emails don't need to be an email. But we also sometimes have meetings that run over. We have meetings that are maybe not pressing, or meetings that I don't really need to be at. And for my mindset, I'm getting to the point where if there's not an agenda, I'm probably not going to go. I need to know what I'm doing and what I can do. It might also be that that meetings are scheduled. You might have a 9 to 10, and then you have a 11 to 1, and then you have a 4 to 5. So you have odd times to get stuff done throughout those, like in between those meetings, which I struggle to transition my brain. Some of you might feel the same, that it's hard to go from a meeting and then to do a big project and then back to another meeting. There might be interruptions, maybe finding the best place to work for you. Maybe it's an office on site, maybe it's a home office, maybe it's a Starbucks. There's always going to be natural interruptions. We're humans, we have families, social things, we have just regular pressing obligations. Those of you who see patients, you know, sometimes you have to go. There's might be on call, you might be precepting, whatever that may be. But are we setting ourselves up for success that can minimize those unnecessary interruptions? And then the last two that I always like to touch on are procrastination and perfectionism. And those two go hand in hand. Are we procrastinating on it because it feels daunting? Or are we trying it to make sure it's so perfect? And you know what? Nothing is ever perfect and nothing is ever done. It's just going to be due. So when we kind of get out of that mindset, we can kind of figure out the best way to break this pattern. And I noticed this pattern a lot with some of our junior faculty that are still trying to figure out their early career steps too, just because it's a lot. You have the clinic load, you have teaching loads, you have all this other stuff. So, and you guys are good. You're good at what you do and you're used to being at the top. And this is a new skill, which makes it feel a little more scary and you might not feel like you're the best yet. So how can we think about this continuum between procrastination and perfectionism? So, and I usually find that this kind of conundrum here, this fear, this procrastination, perfectionism is driven by fear. We might feel that we are afraid to be judged or criticized. It's a lot of critiquing. You have teams, you're writing, your team will revise, and then you go and submit it to a journal and you might get a desk rejection. You might get a rejection. I think the fastest rejection I ever got was like 2 hours once. And it was just such a sucker punch because especially when I think I was a postdoc at the time, and I was just like, I worked so hard on that and somebody just gutted it in 2 hours. Like I didn't even cross it off my list yet and they've already like rejected it. So it's a lot of judging, it's a lot of critiquing. And you might be feeling like, well, people are just going to wonder why I'm going to try to do this when it's not going to end in a result immediately. It might be this sense of fear of failure and rejection. Again, kind of going hand in hand with the criticism that this paper isn't going to get accepted. And you know what, newsflash, it's probably not. I used to get so upset, and the best kind of thing, it takes time and you're allowed to feel those feelings, but rejection means you're trying. So if you're trying to get your work out there and your science out there and you get a rejection, that means you actually submitted it. And that's a big step that a lot of people don't even get to. So thinking about that, and also just remembering that the peer review process, it's gonna have to submit it a couple times. Very rarely are you accepted at the beginning, and very rarely it's always comes back usually with revisions too. It's never usually just a universal acceptance. So kind of accepting that and that sense, and knowing that you're going to get, the process is to finish it, get rejected a couple times, and then it'll find a home. This sense of fear of being not as smart or as capable as somebody else. Maybe there's a colleague or a peer in kind of the same cohort or the same level where you are, and it's like, oh, well, they're so much better at this than me. Well, that's okay. Maybe they started practicing it earlier than you, or maybe they have a different clinic load, or they have a different other obligation load, and maybe they had some training. Maybe they did a master's degree and had some protected time to focus on writing. That's okay. That doesn't mean that you are not capable. It just means everybody is different, and that's okay. And then this also sense of feeling overwhelmed and don't know where to start. Like it's just too much. I don't know what I'm doing. This is the first time I'm doing it. I just can't do this. And I am better off just being productive in other ways. I can get through 10 other things and avoid writing this and feel that sense of, look at everything I've done, but I'm not actually addressing what I should be trying to work on in this moment. So take some time and just think about where yours might be. I know for me, I really struggled with the sense of like, I can get a lot of other things done and I can look at my list and feel productive, but I'm not making the progress on some of the larger pieces that I need to do. And so I would try to justify that to myself. And then I would just create a bigger headache because then I would have less time to crank out something before a deadline. And that would make it stressed and it would be a cyclic process for me. So kind of thinking about yourself and where you fall with this. So what can we do about it? I'm not just going to leave you on like a downtrodden note here, but what can we do? What can we start to think about? There's so many options and pathways that you can take to try to overcome the emotions and figuring out the best way to prioritize it. This list here, this is not all encompassing. This is not like the writing commandments. These are just some things for you to explore. Some of these things are things that have worked well for me or my teams. And my best suggestion is to try one, see if it works. And if it doesn't, try the next thing. Sometimes the best way to figure out what works for you is figuring out what doesn't work for you. And that is just as helpful as knowing, okay, I'm going to do this and this is me and this fits with my life and my schedule. So the first one is time blocking. This is something I have to do. I have to block some time in my calendar. I have to schedule it. And people ask me, they're like, oh, are you in a meeting for 3 hours? And I'm like, no, I'm working on a project during that time. And I usually only tell that to one person who has, I think, the superiority to like override that in my calendar. But again, they respect and know that I'm trying to block certain things at certain times. If it's not in my calendar, it doesn't exist. I'm sure a lot of you feel that way. And this helps. I personally know that I need more than 45 minutes to an hour to kind of write to help my brain get there. So I will try to schedule at least a 2-hour time block to do that. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. But I know that I can't do a meeting and then work on one project for an hour and then another project on an hour and then go to this other meeting. It just doesn't work for me. Writing groups, and that really helps for accountability. I do these a lot with my junior faculty and my fellows. We do them virtually, where essentially you just jump on Zoom with somebody else who's also writing. They don't have to be on the same project as you, but it helps to know that somebody is there and they're also working on a project or working on a paper, and that you're doing the same. And that if you do want to just talk something out, somebody is there, but they are not kind of judging you in that sense. They're not like kind of like holding you down to make sure you write. It's just a way for you to connect with a colleague and create a writing team. This kind of came up, I think, more so for me during COVID. Early COVID, I was a postdoc trying to get a lot of papers out, and actually found on like academic Twitter somebody that was starting this, and I tried to join theirs a little bit, and then I kind of modified it to make it my own for my team and some of my peers. And I find that a 2-hour block is usually really good for a writing group session, and that you all kind of jump on the call and everybody kind of like the first 15 minutes, you catch up, you say hello, how are you, like normal, and everybody kind of goes around and says what they're going to be working on. And so that there's a sense of accountability. And like, I might say, okay, I'm going to work on, I need to finish this. And it might not also be writing specific. It might also help. Sometimes I use it because it helps me with my admin tasks to get them done very quickly. And then I have more time to write. So I'll say, okay, I'm going to give myself 20 minutes to finish X, Y, and Z. And then I'm going to be revising my student's draft of this paper for the rest of the time. And somebody else might say, okay, I'm going to start my oral presentation for this conference, and we're going to go from there. So then you kind of work, that's what, 15 minutes. So I try to then work for maybe like an hour or so, do a little 15-minute, 10-minute break or 10-minute touch base just to see where you are. Sometimes you want to get up, grab some more water, and then do another like 30 or 40 minutes. And then the last 10 minutes are great, again, to touch base and say, hey, this is what I got through. I still didn't do this, but I feel better with this or that. And then schedule the next session. That is usually kind of how I operate them. Again, you can make them your own. It's been wonderful, especially when early COVID, when it was very stressful and we didn't really know what was going on. We had a lot of other things going on in terms of clinic and training and still wanting to try to keep up with projects. I do a lot of portfolio growth and project management across all of our areas in family medicine research and primary care research. So I was doing this a lot with smaller teams too, to help them stay on track with things like that. So see if that works for you. Maybe you have a colleague, and it doesn't also have to be at here. It can be in another place or another institution or an old friend from residency or from med school, and you want to try to do this together. And that could be a cool way to also feel like you're reconnecting and being productive and working together. Third is the tomato timer. I use this at times too, sometimes more with my admin work, but for those of you who don't have heard of it, a tomato timer, the Pomodoro timer, it's 25 minutes on, 5-minute break, 25 on, 5-minute break. You do that a few rounds, and then you get a 30-minute break, and then you kind of keep going back and forth. I like this website specifically. It's all free. You can just put this link into your browser. I like this one because you can see at the bottom there where you can add tasks and you can kind of check them off too, to make sure you're trying to stay on track. Sometimes I find that this is very helpful when I don't have a lot of time and I am trying to be as productive as possible, or I have a very busy day or a lot of little things that I'm going to forget. I find that this can be helpful. And then lastly, I put this on here more so for my trainees, but I always find it to be helpful. Sometimes you just have to put the damn phone away. Sometimes we get so distracted, or we need to close out of different things on our browsers, or like, and it's not always possible. And I understand and respect, oh, where do we go? I don't see patients, so I don't pretend to know what that's like, and I don't have some of those obligations. But I find that there's probably at least an hour and a half that you might be able to work without being alerted to something, or going do not disturb and making your settings so that like your partner and your kid's school can come through if there's an emergency. So again, figuring out what works for you. A lot of my residents and my medical students, I tell them to put, if they're trying to really focus on school or they find they're really distracted by their phones, you can set your settings so that after so many minutes on social media, it locks for the day. There's all kinds of stuff like that. Sometimes that is helpful, or even just putting your phone in a different room. Again, a tip that I did from my dissertation, I would put it in the pantry and I would hide it behind stuff, and I would then be in a different room and know that I would eventually go back because I'm going to need a snack, but it's not sitting on the table right next to me, or putting it across the room can sometimes be helpful. Also, another one I liked was putting it in between the couch cushions. So anytime you got up, you wouldn't see it, but you knew it was kind of there in case there was an emergency. So figure out, see if any of these resonate with you. If any of these are kind of like, oh, maybe I'll give it a shot. Cool. You want to modify them? Go for it. Do what works for you. These are just some tips to help you kind of start thinking about the approach. So last section here, this is kind of like I said, a catch-all, mix of variety of topics of writing and publishing that don't really fit in these things, but I find to be really helpful when it's just kind of bluntly said to people. So authorship. When you're collaborating with a team, establish authorship roles early. Don't make it awkward, be blunt, be direct. The more direct we are when it comes to authorship, the easier the conversations become. Sometimes people get a little uncomfortable with it. You don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to take something out of context. No. We need to drive the conversations. Establish those roles early. And if you want to be lead on a paper, know that that's going to come with some extra work, but that means you're also going to be driving the team. You're going to be managing the team. Take point or not. Figure out where you are in your career, what you're looking for, what you need, and how that can happen. And lucky for us, the International Committee on Medical Education, Medical Journal Editors has authorship criteria. So we've gotten into some situations where you might feel like, is somebody actually an author? They might be on the project, but are they on the paper? And that can be different. And that's okay that that's different. This might happen a lot too with medical students. I work at a very large academic medical system, and we have over 120 trainees that want to do volunteer work just with family medicine. So we have a lot of students that want this, and it's like, I can't manage all of them. And just because you're volunteering on a project doesn't mean you're necessarily giving consistent work in a certain way that faculty and residents and fellows are. So you can use these criteria to make sure that everybody who is on the paper or the deliverable is substantially contributing to the conception, design of the work, analysis, interpretation, that they've been integrally involved in drafting and reviewing the work. They've been given a final approval. They've reviewed it all before it goes out to a journal. And then they are also in agreement that they're going to be accountable for that work too. So sometimes your medical students and trainees that are earlier in their career, they just don't have time for it, and that's okay. They might be somewhere else down the line, but especially like I think for interns, like intern year is hard enough as it is, that focusing on that might not be the best. But what if there are issues? Because sometimes there are going to be issues, and I feel like everybody has some kind of authorship issue story of some sort. Normally we can try to rectify or at least mitigate and prevent some of these from happening by open conversations early on, but not always. So some situations you might encounter are what is called ghost or gift authorship, where somebody is maybe very senior or is a medical student or trainee, kind of in and out, and you're just kind of giving them authorship in a sense, or they're expecting authorship. A co-author is unhappy with their order. We know that order for manuscripts can really matter when it comes to the different elements of like where you are in your career, if you're going for promotion, different things. So I'm at a place where I'm still junior. I want first authorships. I'm leading these studies. I have a colleague that just got full professor. She's like, I'm blessed. I don't care. I have what I need. And now my job is to help support the next people coming up. So making sure that's clear and figuring that out. I try to be very direct with my trainees and some of the other faculty that if I'm working on this, if I'm expecting to be first, I tell you I'm expecting to be first, and I will take point on being first. And I try to make sure I tell particularly my students, my trainees, my very junior trainees, that even though it might be like their class project, they're using my data, I'm kind of telling them the study and they're just executing it. That is still my intellectual property. I am still lead on that. I'll usually say you can be first author on a poster, but when it comes to the manuscript, I will be lead on that. But that's one of the first conversations I have. And that is just a habit, a really good habit to get into. You might find that some co-authors are not fulfilling their responsibilities. So as the team, you have to be able to check and balance everybody out to make sure that people are kind of doing what they say they're going to do. If you're going to be lead, you got to know that's going to be a little more work. And if maybe that means you don't want to be lead because you don't have the time right now, or you're in a different portion of your phase or whatever. And then we talked about students, and then sometimes this happens too when somebody is maybe running the program that somebody else is studying or evaluating. So you might have somebody that's like on the ground doing the day-to-day operations of a center, or a day-to-day operations of like education piece, but they're not necessarily a part of the research side of it. So that can sometimes get into a gray area. So the bottom line is to talk about it early. And if you find that like the lead author is not jumpstarting the conversations, you do it. And this is really the only way we can kind of change the narrative around issues when it comes to authorship and making it uncomfortable is, again, just by normalizing these conversations at the very beginning, and not just at the beginning, but having them throughout, doing periodic check-ins to make sure everybody's still on the same page. Okay, and then the last part here before I kind of give you some extra links and stuff is predatory publishing. So when you're finding the right home for your paper, predatory journals are a big concern. Some of you may have heard of them, some of you may not. Predatory journals are essentially organizations that publish counterfeit journals to exploit open access publishing models where the author is paying what is being published. So I would have to pay a price to publish my paper in a certain journal. Their main goal is profit, and a lot of times it's a scam. It also really undermines the peer review process when it comes to our science, and is really kind of undermining the movement we have when it comes to moving the knowledge base forward. Okay, so this is not to say that all journals that have a price are predatory, because that's not true. But you'll be able to kind of figure out who is predatory and be on high alert for that. So again, we have some checklists. This is from Beal's list, and there are a bunch of different websites that are free that you can just check to make sure the journals you're interested in submitting to are not predatory. You can check those lists. Beal's list is the biggest one. Checking the journal as well as the publishing company, because sometimes they'll try to do an umbrella name for the publishing company and try to, again, scam it. Looking through the journal's archives to see if there's any papers that seem off topic, or like this doesn't really fit with what the mission of the journal is. Why is this published here? Check what the website says, what the journal's website directly says about the peer review process and costs. It should be very transparent. And if it's not, that should be a red flag for you. Reputable journals are direct. Spelling, grammar errors, and email solicitations. You might have gotten some of those. It'll be like, dear Miss Doctor, will you submit a paper to submit your women's health paper to a biomedical molecular journal? No, I'm not. That doesn't make any sense. So you'll kind of see that, and I have a couple examples for you. Verify that your journal is indexed in a reputable database, a Medline, PubMed, that should be. And then talk to librarians, colleagues, mentors, ask around. If you're unsure, if you kind of have a gut feeling, because your gut is usually right. Okay. So some quick examples. These were fun. I had one of my coordinators pull them for me. She was thrilled. So Caitlin Davis is a master's level coordinator of mine. Dear Dr. Davis, first red flag. She doesn't have that title. I'm following up on the email I sent you a few days ago. I believe you saw my email on our proposition. I did not hear back from you. Inquiries regarding Great Britain Journals Press. She's like, what? Like, see, so you can kind of flags all over the place here. Next one, this is one that was submitted to me. They, dear Professor Casola, Allison R. Okay. So it's usually they're trying to scam, template it in, get as many out. Hope you're doing well. Regarding our submission for smart tourism, application of modern intelligent technology in tourism management. I'm a reproductive epidemiologist. I'm not publishing in tourism. So again, flags all over the place. So, and once you start publishing and you review some papers, you're going to get a lot of these solicitations. Sometimes your email servers will catch them. Sometimes they'll come through. But these would all be examples of, okay, flag, I need to pause and double check on some things. So because I practice what I preach here, I have samples of non-traditional research papers that I've written and published throughout my career. I have a couple commentaries, I have a call to action, a lessons learned, and a point of view. Not encompassing, but I just want to give you some examples of what we talked about earlier, that you can directly see how there are different ways to do science and different ways to do scholarship when it comes to what you do. So some additional readings and links. These are just some great links I've used in the past or that I like to share, so you can feel free to click around, have the links for the predatory journals there, authorship criteria, and some other things from writing centers about the process as well. And then lastly, references. They're all embedded there, but if you wanted to double check anything, you're more than welcome to, or read a little bit further. So I want to thank you so much for your time. This was really fun. I'm more than happy to connect. We can ask questions now. We can talk offline. You can send me an email. I would also love your feedback on this session. This is solely for me. I like to just see what my audience thinks, and if there are things that I should improve on as a speaker, or if there are other content areas you would like to see, it just goes to me for my own professional growth. So thank you guys so much. I'll leave my email up for another couple minutes, but we can, Amanda, we can turn it back to you. We can do questions if you would like.
Thank you so much, Dr. Casola. I appreciate you so much for sharing on this topic. Great presentation, great tips. We do have a few minutes for questions if there are any. If you have any in-depth questions, we are going to try something new and do like a mini post session just to provide some collaboration around this topic. Let's see. So we do have a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any suggestions for finding a writing mentor for those of us who are outside of the academic institution? So yes, I would say I know that the Society of Teachers for Family Medicine has a fellowship, fellowship program. And I have some colleagues that have done it, and it's kind of like a professional development writing group. They kind of connect you with a mentor, and it helps you just to get practice and grow in whatever areas you're interested in. So I would definitely take a look at STFM as well as NAPCRG, the North American Primary Care Research Group. And they have a lot of resources there, particularly for faculty that want to do more and want to get involved, ways to get involved with different teams to help you do that so that you don't necessarily feel like you're doing it all on your own. So I'll just type that in the chat. So STFM, NAPCRG, and then I think the AA FP, right, has one too. So I would say look around at some of your professional organizations and see what's going on. Particularly, I know a lot of times there is a vested interest for helping faculty that are not in academic institutions. And I do want to note and mention that a lot of this is so much easier when you're at an academic institution. You have different resources that are at your fingertips for you. I have a librarian that I can connect with, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. And it just, I think finding the right team around you is pivotal. So I think looping into some of those professional organizations are great. I know I worked with somebody from NAPCRG STFM with the CIRA data, which is publicly available data on medical education in family medicine. And I was able to connect with, they kind of assigned me a mentor, and she was at the University of Utah. So, and now we're friends, we're colleagues. So there's ways to kind of connect with people that way. So I would say definitely look into your professional orgs and see how that can support.
Dr. Casola, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What kind of language do you use when, let's say, you're working with, like you said, other contributors, and you do eventually say, like, you know what, someone's not pulling their weights. Maybe we should ask them to kind of like hop off this project. Like, what kind of language do you use to address that?
So that can be difficult. It depends on really their level. Are they like a trainee? Are they very senior faculty? Are they your boss? But I would say kind of convening the group together and maybe like listing out, say, okay, this is where we are. We have this person here, this person here, this person here. These are the roles of each kind of person. We know that the lead person needs to do this, and then give the opportunity, like, hey, like, I know when we started, are you still able to contribute to this in the way that you initially thought you could? And then it makes it feel less of like an accusatory type of thing. And then if they say yes, then you can say, okay, cool. Here's kind of the group's timeline. We're going to need this by this date, and this by this date, this by this date. And I think kind of getting organized across the board will then help to ease the conversation. And again, that takes time to get to that place. But I think the more we communicate consistently, maybe you have a team check-in once a month for writing, or you send a monthly summary email just to make sure everybody is still good. We're still looking at, this is our target journal, this is our draft, this is where we are, these are our next steps. And assigning that approach can be helpful to kind of start that, using that type of language to get there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining today.